What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's Bags Bodega session. We've got William Hayden, one of the Bag Boys, which we'll talk about as an interesting title for us in a second. But thank you for joining me, man. I appreciate you. He's also one of the hosts of the show, so it's an opportunity to introduce him.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. This is something we've been talking about doing for quite a long time now.
A long time. So I'll let you introduce yourself. Just give the shortened version of who you are, where you're from, how you got here.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit because I knew this was coming, and I was thinking about my first job. My first job was in critical issues management. I worked at an advisory firm, and I remember that when I put in my notice when I was leaving, one of the guys who was in charge of an account I worked on came up to me and was like, "If you ever mention anything about this account anywhere, I will hunt you down and kill you." So I'm not going to go into details necessarily on that phase of my life. Although I think he was kidding. You never know. That critical issues management role, like candidly, I grew up, I was born in Chicago, grew up in Denver for a while, and then ended up moving to Connecticut. So experienced, three very different parts of the country.
For sure.
Went down to school in North Carolina at Wake Forest University, where I was recognized as a Shakespeare scholar, which is cool, but it doesn't have a lot of practical application. So like everyone's like, "Cool, you're a Shakespeare scholar. What are you gonna do for a living?"
Okay, let's take a step back. What does it mean to be a Shakespeare scholar? 1, 2. So you're a writer, you're a poet, you're
Yeah, I think that those are fair words to describe who I am as a human.
Okay, cool.
What it means to be a Shakespeare scholar, all it is that I had a compelling idea for analysis of Richard II, which is one of Shakespeare's histories, and Henry IV, Part 1, which is one of Shakespeare's histories, and I wrote a paper. And they liked it enough that I received an honorable mention for the H. Broadus Jones Shakespeare Prize.
There we go.
So that was cool. And I think that essay holds up. Although I did run the thesis statement through ChatGPT a little while ago, and I think that their essay was as good as mine. So hopefully Shakespeare scholarship has come a long way since I was getting recognized for it. But yeah, I mean, like, I've always been a writer.
Yeah.
I think that stems from being a reader. I was the kid who was tired at school because I stayed up all night reading with a flashlight under my sheets.
Yep.
And then, you go through whatever educational experience you go through. And at the end of it, the logical end, wherever that happens, I think humans face a transition. And it's like your favorite subject doesn't necessarily map to a career path that's viable or that like helps you achieve what you want. So I knew I wanted to live in New York.
Yep.
New York is expensive.
Yep. Got to pay the bills.
And all I really had to my name was this English degree. And so I was lucky to find a job in critical issues management that required a lot of writing. I've always maintained creative writing as a pursuit in my free time.
Yep.
But the 2.5 years I spent there weren't super creative. I did learn a lot. I was exposed to C-suite executives at Fortune 100 companies on a regular basis. And then I had an opportunity to take the skills I developed in corporate storytelling and pivot into brand storytelling. So I went over to IPG. I was hired at the largest media agency under IPG to work on a new capability called original content. And the thesis pioneer named Brendan Gall over in that industry, who's one of my closest mentors to this day. He had the idea that if brands stop paying for commercials that people don't want to watch and start paying for feature films and television series that people opt in to watch, then brands can tell more authentic stories. The challenge was convincing brands to do that.
Of course.
Brand is comfortable spending a couple $1 million to create a commercial and tens of millions of bucks to put that commercial out around the world. The metrics that are used to track that are pretty clear. You can see how it performed. It's a little different when it comes to creating a Hollywood film.
Of course.
You're going to try to premiere in a film festival you're going to try to sell and make money on. We actually ended up being pretty successful, and ultimately the CEO of IPG Media Brands gave us a mandate to build a net new independent film and television studio within IPG that operates today as Traverse 32. I actually got to see the theatrical arm, which launched after I left, put on a play on Broadway. I went to see that the other day.
Yeah.
Really cool and compelling projects, but one of the major Hollywood studios, someone that you've seen their name on many films that you've watched in theaters, sent through a film slate for 2021, and there were 20 plus films on it, and only one of them was not directed by someone who looks like me, a white dude. And that struck me, particularly as I saw over and over how diverse folks would get to the table but not always walk away with a deal. And I spent a lot of time thinking about reflecting back on work I did in college, as an English major, trying to bring literature and other resources to prisons in North Carolina, up to how Hollywood operates and where opportunities exist. And I really, it was clear to me that there are decision makers in many industries and areas that look a lot like me, and whether intentionally or not, and I think most cases unintentionally, that prevents other people who don't look like me from having equitable opportunities. So I started spinning the wheels about ways that you could increase access to entrepreneurship. My lens was specifically creative, but started talking to you, and I think that opened it up a little bit in terms of the aperture.
Well, so there was a moment there. I remember now 3 years ago now, 3.5 years ago now, when you were deciding, right? Like you were working overtime at Traverse 32, right? You were, also working overtime trying to get Bags started. And there's this push and pull of, and honestly, like Traverse 32 was your, like, that was your dream job, right? Like you were doing it.
Oh yeah.
Like talk to me about that, like decision of going from being a part-time entrepreneur trying to build something and like leaving, honestly, a pretty stable, great job to go down, the path of being a founder.
Yeah, it was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make, right? Like being in my mid-20s, producing feature films at a Fortune 100 company where I was getting paid a solid salary to do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like I was grinding in Hollywood trying to make a way.
Yeah.
Like working service jobs to pull it off.
Yeah.
And I absolutely respect that grind. But
of course,
I was glad to not be in it.
Yeah.
I think the reality was that at some point I looked around at my life and I was like, I have everything that I want, but it's so obvious to me that so many people don't even get a chance to have what they want.
Yeah.
I think I always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial bone in me. I came up with a bunch of harebrained schemes.
You ran a couple businesses in there.
Ran a couple businesses, started an advisory firm at one point of my own, helped launch a non-alcoholic spirits company. So I had that entrepreneurial bug.
Yeah.
And the story I like to tell to embarrass you is that I brought like my 15th terrible idea to my father, who's an entrepreneur himself. And he said to me, if you want to be an entrepreneur, go into business with Daniel Taylor, because at least that might work. And yeah, I think the decision just came down to, can I be comfortable with what I have if other people will never get a chance to have something like it? And the answer was no. I think when I left my critical issues advisory job, one of the partners there said to me, you have to ask yourself every day if you're a force for good. And if the answer is no, you need to change what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think Traverse 32, absolutely a force for good, telling stories that need to be told, not telling stories that don't need to be told, specifically doing that.
Yeah.
But I saw an opportunity in entrepreneurship to have an impact that is beyond the scope of what I can do as an individual or as an employee. And I felt like I needed to jump on that opportunity.
And how have you seen storytelling specifically within the entrepreneurial space have an impact on, people's aspirations, right? Like which businesses they decide to start building, how they fund their business, right? Because like I think storytelling is actually such a critical part of how like people perceive the world and also like their own successes. How have you seen it play out in the entrepreneurial space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two realities. There's the natural human resting position, and there's the way that storytelling is used for better or worse in our modern capitalist society. Like as humans, we built civilization by telling stories around a campfire, sitting around a campfire and telling stories to each other. That is the advent of everything that exists around us today.
That's crazy.
Now, the way that it manifests today is really interesting in a couple ways. I saw I was in a newsletter this morning that Monster is finally completing their acquisition of Bang Energy, which they're buying out of bankruptcy. Bang Energy was everywhere for a long time. You open a social media app, there they are. Every bodega you walk into, there's Bang Energy. And it all centers around the reason they went bankrupt was because they were found liable for false advertising and owed Monster like $280 million. And it was because they used this term super creatine. And in the lawsuit, it came out that there was not a super creatine. It wasn't even really a thing. That's false advertising. They have to pay damages to an entrenched player in the space that has a lot of resources to go into a lawsuit. And a business goes out of business, but that story allowed them to become an enormous business. They told a story that differentiated them and gave them a hook in the market. Now that story was a lie, which is problematic, but I think it goes to show that a good story is key to success. And I think that there's also the idea of stories that we tell ourselves and that we are told and that stick like earworms in our brain. And I think one of the biggest ones that we talk about all the time is venture capital is the funding vehicle for entrepreneurship. And not the reality, which is venture capital is the funding vehicle for less than 1% of entrepreneurship. It got a little out of hand. VC, quote VC, and I think private equity masqueraded as VC a lot. It still does to an extent. VC did invest in some things that are not traditionally venture backable, but as that starts to go away in a economic market that hasn't been this negative since the VC boom. And the boom I'm talking about is in the last 10 years, not 30 years ago. Now all of a sudden there's going to be a reckoning in terms of the valuations in VC and private equity portfolios, and VCs are going to be a lot more selective about where they put their money and how confident they can be in the valuation multiple, the return that they can generate off of every dollar invested. And so for people who have heard the story for their entire lives, this company raised VC, this founder made $1 billion, this, that, and the other, they're thinking, what do I know and what do I like and where can I apply that? And the place that people tend to jump when they're thinking about entrepreneurship is like the application of skills in a service business or a consumer product.
Truth.
When you're really good at cleaning pipes, you start a pipe cleaning business. And you have this like really special smoothie that you make in the mornings and you want to put it in a bottle and sell it to other people because you feel good when you drink it. And so that's where entrepreneurship starts to happen. But the first thing that entrepreneurs do when they have a product is like chase down investors. Where, I've seen reality where you can start a business for a couple $1,000 and start selling a product and fund the business by selling a product using revenue and find alternative ways to do it. But no one's really telling those stories. No one's telling the stories. You hear like this bootstrapped business sold for $1 billion in the case of like a Survey Monkey, but no one's talking about how they bootstrapped it. Like, what were the financing vehicles? Where did outside capital come to play? Is it all some individual's money? Is it all revenue? And in a lot of cases, it's not. There's other things that need to be explored.
Without a doubt. And I also think it's reframing that definition of success and what that looks like, right? Because, the reality is your odds of building $1 billion company, right? Well, one, we need to talk about like what venture capitals actually should be used for. But right? Like you building a business that generates, call it $2 million a year, call it $1 million a year, $400,000 of profit every single year for you. That's probably more than you were making at your day job.
It's a good life.
That's a good life, right? You get that to be $1 million, that's a really good life. And in reality, you get it up to 5 to 10, right? Like you're set, your kids are set, right? And so, but to your point on stories, I just don't think those stories are told enough. And I think there's a conversation around defining success that needs to redefining entrepreneurial success that needs to go far and wide. But before we dive into some, that's like, what should venture capital in reality, like what types of businesses should actually be raising venture capital? And also before you do that, talk to us a little bit about like what you do here at Bags. Like where do you spend your time? You talk to businesses, talk to partners. Go ahead.
100%. So my role at Bags is, I can put a label on it. It's head of sales and partnerships.
Yep.
I don't think that accurately describes what I do.
No.
I don't use that title really anywhere except for internally.
Yep.
Because starting a company, you do a lot of everything and a little of everything too.
Facts.
But on the partnership side, primarily what I try to do every day is put myself in the shoes of our clients and go figure out what they need.
Yep.
So that I can predict what they're going to need and have a resource available for it. So that means going and figuring out who the best lenders in the market are, how to get them in our platform, how to make sure their products are available to people. It's going out and finding communities that are filled with entrepreneurs who haven't been told this story but need to hear it, and making sure that we're showing up to tell that story. It's going to the biggest companies in the world and grabbing a seat at the table and then holding that door open behind me so that whoever else needs to come into the room can come into the room and say, hey, here's the way that you need to be thinking about this because we have data that proves it. And just being, available to people, being a human on the other side of a phone is something that's really important to me. I had a call with an entrepreneur a few weeks ago, and I was handing the two of them on the team off to Evan, who's our head of our business lending specialist team and a rock star.
Yeah.
But they asked me, they said, does Evan have a personality? Because people are so used to running into, whether it's a chatbot or a human who's so exhausted by all that they're doing that they're just, checking boxes. I think it's absolutely important that we maintain some level of heart, trust, and transparency and personality in what we do so that people can relate to it.
And to your point, staying close to the customer, right? Like actually continuing to follow up, be part of the conversation. And also like, we talk about this all the time, do the things that don't really scale sometimes, right? Like talking to an entrepreneur, spending your time, like it might not scale, but one, like you'll have that impact on an entrepreneur. Two, there are insights, information that we're going to be able to gather from actually talking to customers, that the only real way that we're going to get that information is a real conversation by a real human.
And you remember, we said this in the very early days, like when we were talking about what we were trying to build, we told ourselves, if we can help even 50 entrepreneurs,
It's a win.
then we've already won.
It's a W.
We've won 10, 20, 30 times over here already. And so at the end of the day, I was talking to Ignacio, our co-founder, yesterday, and he was just checking in and seeing how I'm doing. And I was like, I'm resolved. That's how I feel. I feel resolved. Yeah. We set out to do something and we've achieved enough that I'm happy with the outcome.
I agree.
Like in some radical scenario where things stopped right here, I would be happy with the journey.
Correct.
And that's a good seat to be in as an entrepreneur because it means that it's all upside from here. No matter what happens, the win is already there. The bag is already secured for me.
Correct.
In my heart. And I trust that I'll be okay as a result of showing up for the world and trying to help out. I want to get back to the question on what venture capital should be used for. And I think I'll specifically start on what it should not be used for.
Even better.
And I would say it's super simple. If you have a business that can make enough money to survive, don't raise venture capital. Venture capital should be used for a business that needs to exist. but that will not turn a profit or sustainable revenues for a long time. So you use venture capital to get an injection of money that is a dependency. Without it, the company can't happen. If the company can happen without venture capital, don't raise venture capital.
That's the truth.
And the reality there is that there are software companies, there are tech companies that shouldn't raise venture capital. And there are bootstrap stories in software, in technology, where venture capital wasn't necessary and it works. As soon as you can generate revenue, start to generate revenue, and you can find other ways to invest in growth. Now, there may be an opportunity for strategic capital. That's another conversation. Corporate venture works a little differently. So if it's a partner that's going to massively alter your supply chain, give you the ability to 3x, 5x, 10x your revenue, those deals are worth considering. But it shouldn't be the top of mind consideration for how the business is going to be funded.
Let it out. And let's switch gears to debt, right? I think for a lot of real reasons, there's a big stigma around debt in the US, right? How do we, talk a little bit about why that stigma exists. One, two, if you were to put yourselves in the shoes of a founder who might be like, debt, why would I raise debt? What would you say to that founder? So let's talk about the stigma, and then how do you start to have these conversations with founders who might not think debt is the right approach?
100%. And the stigma, for a lot of reasons, is well-deserved, deeply entrenched. You think about the student loan crisis, you think about mortgage crises,
credit cards,
think about credit card debt, personal debt, credit scoring. The debt ecosystem is full of horror stories about predatory behavior, exclusion, outright racism and sexism. And so against all those factors, when you have this umbrella term debt, it's scary. And it should be scary. Nobody wants to be in debt in a situation where it's bad debt. I was laughing with one of our funding partners yesterday because I was saying how when I mention good debt in a group setting, always some person's like, good debt, that's a thing? Because it doesn't seem like it would be a good thing.
Truth.
But it is. And the reality is, the secret sauce of everything we do is that in any case where you get a good deal, debt should be cheaper than equity.
Okay, break that down a layer deeper. What do you mean by cheaper?
You will. The cost of capital is something that you always have to think about when you're figuring out how you're getting money. If you say, hey, I have a business, it's worth $1 million today. I need $100,000 to operate. You take $100,000 loan out, you pay 12% of that in interest over time. Your cost of capital on that $100,000 is $12,000. On the other hand, if you raise $100,000 on a safe note, seed round, whatever it is, and that converts, and you've given up 10% of your business, then if you double the size of your business to a $2 million valuation, the cost of capital of that $100,000 is already another $100,000. It's almost 10 times the amount of the debt deal, because with equity, you're selling a piece of your business. And then I think the other thing,
until you
permanently.
literally permanently.
And you're inviting other stakeholders into the conversations. You're losing a little bit of control over how things go.
Decision-making power.
And while you might be able to make decisions, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur the other day, and he wants to take his business in another direction, but his investors will raise hell. And he doesn't have the bandwidth to counter all that. He has the authority, but authority is always questioned by the moneyed in a lot of cases, and those are the people who have the ability to question authority in easy ways, and that's another sociological conversation that we can avoid today. But you don't want to be stuck in a situation, and I know you have personal experiences. I know this episode is not about you, with taking the wrong money.
That's a fact.
And with an investor, it's not so simple to just refinance it. With debt, you can just refinance. You end up with a bad debt deal, cool, let's figure out how we can refinance that into a good debt deal. And that's possible, achievable, And actually, it can happen in a couple weeks, a couple months, a couple days if you're lucky.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. No, it's yeah, I mean, I've lived the experience of taking money from the wrong people. And, it took 3 to 4 years just to unwind, right? And land the ship. And in reality, what may seem like a really, really good deal at the time, you really got to think long-term about it, right? Like equity is really, you think about value and wealth generate, like that is the value in your business. And as soon as you start to give that up and give that control, it can be done in the right way. But I think in a lot of cases, in some cases, it might not necessarily be the right decision. There's also life circumstance changes, right? Like, you might be running a business and decide, hey, great, like this isn't the right thing for me anymore, right? Like if you own 100% of your business, you could shut that business down. You can decide to sell your business, right? Like that's a choice you can make. When you have other investors, that's not a choice that's on you, right? Like you are personally liable to continue to run that business. There are covenants on you in order to continue to make that happen.
Or they can take it away from you, which is a story that's happened in a couple cases.
Which be happening.
In the I won't name names, but if you look at the non-dairy cheese market, there's a horror story where founders ousted and left with nothing.
That's what I'm saying.
And the other thing is that the reality is, as a category, venture-backed founders rarely make money.
Yep.
The crazy thing to think about is that, and someone on the internet will do the math on this, and I think it'll hold up. But if you IPO your company for $1 billion, a venture-backed startup, $1 billion IPO, with all the dilution that goes into getting you ready to IPO, you'll make about the same money as a small business owner who bootstraps to $50 million and sells at that level.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, right? Again, we just want to caveat this with, there are certain industries and or businesses really that I look at as being innovation related, right? So I think that's what people, that's what we kind of skip over in venture today, or venture even the 90s, right? Like it originally was a type of investment that was super risky for things that required, to your point, a ton of capital in order to truly innovate, R&D, and required a ton of people, time, and resources, right? Like, you think about the computer, right? You think about the engineering time that needed to go in that just to make the first product, right? But in doing so, right, the return of that first investment was significant as a byproduct of the innovation that needed to go into it. And don't get me wrong, there is also innovation that can happen without that, right? We spoke to a founder who bootstrapped her automatic plant water. It's a planter that automatically waters your plants. She created a microclimate. She's an engineer, a microclimate for these plants to essentially feed themselves. And that's innovation. She didn't raise a dollar from anybody, right? But managed to pull together that MVP. And so I do really think that there's the barrier to entry to start a business today is lower than it potentially ever has been. Doesn't mean your business is necessarily going to be successful. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean you're not going to be able to, there's not going to be risk involved. Doesn't mean you can't hustle. You have to hustle, right? But I just think, making sure that when you're starting your business, you really sort of understand which side of things go on. But in reality, to your point, like if you can start a business without raising $100, don't, right? Like it's really that simple. So switching gears here a little bit and a little bit more about like, you and your journey, right? We're Bags is a business focused on, helping people of color and women, as well as those who have disabilities, veterans, LGBTQIA+, right? And you're the third founder, the white dude, right? Talk to us a little bit about, honestly, that experience, one, two. No, let's just start there. We'll dive deeper.
Yeah, I mean, we have a joke. I don't know if you hear it very often, but I say it in front of customers all the time. It's like, who are we built to serve? Literally anybody who is not me. Right? As the epitome of the most privileged class in this country. That doesn't mean that we'll kick anybody out, right? Someone who looks just like me can bring a business to Bags, can find their 100%. Solution. But when I'm out there in the market adding funding partners, one thing that I'm looking for is like, do you have a vested mandate to invest in women and minority-owned businesses, or another category that's underrepresented in data and performance in entrepreneurship? And I think it's an easy decision for me. What it takes is like an acknowledgement that privilege is real.
Facts.
And I've talked about that before.
And my privilege is real too.
And that doors will open for me that won't open to other people. And I'm not saying the person on the other side of that door is doing it on purpose. But we live in a society that has such entrenched stigmas and biases, and it goes so far back. And I won't dive into politics, but like obviously this is a week for anyone who's listening to this later. This is the Supreme Court decision week, where we're seeing decisions that are being made about a moment in time where the reality, the reason that moment in time is significant goes back to something that's happening years prior in the development, in a child's development, right? Like acts of bias and racism in all sorts of systems lead to an outcome that is, I'm just like dodging saying what I'm talking about. In the affirmative action consideration, where schools want to consider race so that they can diversify their student body, the reason they're doing that isn't because they're trying to give somebody a leg up that doesn't deserve it. They're just acknowledging that like the way our society works, diverse students have probably encountered racism that results in lower grades versus their white peers in primary school, right? Less access to extracurricular activities that boost a resume. All those other factors that happen in a society that struggles with structural bias. And so to like look at an issue and say, hey, this is super clear and related to one thing. It's never just one thing. And so for me, I have to be able to say, hey, like, yeah, I could say like, that's just the way it is and I'm going to enjoy my life. But I would rather see society improved somewhat, even if it means a slower path or no path at all. To me, like being comfortable and cushy and kicking back on like what I was given that I didn't work for.
Absolutely. And in reality, it's you know, it's all about finding that, it's all about creating equal access opportunity, right? I think that's what people often you know, confuse with affirmative action. It's not, and even just when it comes to starting a business or access to capital, it's not that we're actually trying to get someone ahead on the playing field. It's that in reality, we're just trying to make sure that at least they're operating on an even playing field, right? Versus one running uphill and the other sitting at the top, right? Like, you know, and I really want to like that. One, it's why we do things here at Bags, but two, I think there's just a broader misconception around, you know, honestly, the work that needs to happen in regards to make sure that there is an even playing field for.
And by the way, a lot of it is storytelling, right? Because the affirmative action thing, the only reason it even matters, because I'm telling you that there are community colleges in this country where you can get a better, more practical education to have a more successful life than an Ivy League college. But the story we tell ourselves is what gives that that Ivy League degree validity or supremacy. Right? Not a lot of people can get into this school. They'll say, we don't have enough resources to admit more students. That's not true. It's that the prestige requires that there be too few people coming through with that degree. It's a story we tell. If we tell a different story, the reality shifts. And I think that when we're confronting major issues like this, a lot of it comes down to the stories we tell. And how the stories we tell inform the actions and decisions that people make.
Without a doubt. I want to shift gear one more time for the last sort of few minutes and talk about your own journey as a human, right? And, you know, honestly, the transition from being in that stable, cushy job to now being, you know, a founder for the last 3 years, building Bags. You know, I know mental health has been a big theme for you, right? Talk to me and talk to us a little bit about your journey as a founder, dealing with your own mental health, you know, finding the right opportunity and balance. You know, it's stressful, right? It's not cushy. There's risk involved. Like, you know, how do you deal with it from a day-to-day perspective? And like, what is your own mental health journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm someone who's always willing to talk about the fact that I had a full-on mental breakdown in my first job. And what that looked like was, I was on a number of accounts. I had to get up at 6 a.m. every day. I had to send reports out at like 10 p.m. every night. So I was working a lot. And I wasn't passionate about what I was doing. I didn't think that what I was doing had any positive impact on the world. So it was really easy for me to burn out and then get pushed through burnout by the requirements of the job. And like the reality is that if I don't get this paycheck, then the credit card interest bill is going to hit, the rent bill is going to hit, all these things are going to happen, and I'm not going to be okay, right? Living paycheck to paycheck like most people in this country do. And I snapped. And I was lucky to have an opportunity to explain myself and earn trust back in that organization. So I didn't get fired on the spot and actually have a financial crisis to go with my mental health crisis. But I easily could have. And, at Bags, I haven't had a mental breakdown. I don't even need to knock on wood because I know I won't. And a big part of that is that I do purposeful work. I think doing purposeful work is like the first key hurdle to maintaining mental health in a space where we're going to spend most of our time. We'll spend more time at work in our lives. We'll spend, me and you, we're lucky. We hang out. We went to high school together, so
I mean,
it's not like we weren't friends.
It's also, but if you think about it, we spend more time together now than we did being friends for 15 years.
And like calling each other best friends.
Literally.
And now we spend like multiples more time together. We spend more time as humans, Americans, but it's true other places, at work than we do with our families, our friends, and at leisure combined. So it's important that that amount of time be directed at something that is useful. And then it's about, having a human life that goes alongside my work life. And that's a question I ask people when I do like interviews, job interviews, or even if I'm just getting to know somebody. It's like, what do you do as a human? And a lot of people, their answer is like, oh, I go to the gym and watch Netflix. And it's like, okay, so you got a corporate job that takes up most of your time, and then you work out. I like to work out too. I get that. And watch Netflix, but like, where's the culture coming alive in your life? Where is the education, the experience that you're trying to cultivate? Like, where's the hustle and drive and motivation? And I think that, maybe this is a controversial take and some psychologists will yell at me, but I think that the number one factor to alleviate things like depression, anxiety, the general depression and anxiety that like everyone's capable of feeling is purpose. And if you have a purposeful life, those things go away. Now that's been my experience. The second that I attached purpose to my life, I stopped getting anxious. I stopped getting depressed. I stopped getting stuck up at night. Now, every once in a while, I'll have a long night because I'm thinking about something like, how do I help this person? How do I save? You can't save everybody. 100%. But I'm at peace because of that purpose. Now, I do think like I stay hydrated. I take a couple
giant ass water bottles.
I take a couple supplements. I maintain close relationships with people that I can call and be honest with. And all that contributes to my ability to be good. But I like my supplements are like vegetables, right? Like I don't take any prescribed medications. Not that I wouldn't. I just like focus on like how I can build a life that feels purposeful, that I'm excited about every day. And it's a lot easier to wake up as a night owl early in the morning. I was up at 6 a.m. today. That's like, if you knew me, you knew me back when, like that was unreasonable.
Crazy. And it's that, I think purpose really is the word, because purpose flows to motivation, right? Purpose flows into your direction. Purpose flows into, where you use your energy. Purpose flows into impact. Like it really does all intertwine together. Well, first of all, thank you, William, for joining us. Everyone, you will definitely hear a lot more from William in additional episodes. We covered everything from purpose to the current events in this world to, you know, thinking about how you start your business to his own path and journey as an incredible founder. And so we appreciate you. I appreciate you spending time with us in the Bags Bodega today. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
Peace.
Happy to be here.